Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good morning to you from South Victory. I am Jason Wheeler in this week for that other Jason who is on assignment. Last week was a big week in national and local politics. The focus of the 2020 election was on North Texas. Here in Dallas, it's estimated that more than 20,000 supporters turned out for President Trump's campaign rally. At the same time, Beto O'Rourke was holding a counter rally in Grand Prairie. Then former Governor Rick Perry resigned as Secretary of Energy. This after months of denying that he was leaving. Plus, that secret tape of House Speaker Dennis Bonnen was finally released. And this morning, we're going to talk with State Representative Nicole Collier about the shooting death of a Tatiana Jefferson by a police officer. But first, let's catch you up on some of the other big political stories that have people talking today. U.S. Representative Elijah Cummings, a legend of the civil rights movement, died early Thursday morning due to complications from long-standing health issues. As chairman of the House Oversight and Reform Committee, he led several investigations into President Trump. He was first elected to Congress in 1966. Cummings was 68. A lot of House Republicans broke with the president this week, rebuking his decision to pull out of Syria. Texas Congressman Michael McCaul, the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, actually helped to craft that resolution that got overwhelming bipartisan support. Early voting in the November 5th constitutional amendment election starts tomorrow and runs through November 1st. There are 10 constitutional amendments on the ballot this time around that deal with everything from retiring law enforcement animals to the state's tax code.